Lesson 8. Did Jesus have a life purpose? Part 2. Last time we looked at John's life purpose statement of Jesus. I've come to give you life and life to the full. And Luke's, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Now we're looking at Matthew and Mark. They share a purpose statement. And we're going to dip into Mark's rendition. Let's begin with a bit of background. And they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. And they were amazed. And those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was to happen to him. They're on the road. They're headed to Jerusalem, and everybody is nervous. Jesus is out in front, just like power walking towards Jerusalem, and they know something is up. And now he tells them very specifically what's up. In fact, this is the third time. He predicts his death. With such specificity, he mentions it would be in Jerusalem, the very city. That he would be betrayed to the chief priests. That's very specific. They would hand him over to the Gentiles, who would then crucify him. But on the third day, he would rise again. They don't hear any of this rising again stuff. But they do know that the hourglass is thinning. And so anybody who wants chief seats when Jesus gets to Jerusalem, they can't imagine he's going to be killed. That must be metaphor or something. They think he's going to sit on a throne. And now is the time to grab the power positions. So James and John, with the help of their mother, Salome, but Matthew adds that addition, and she actually was Jesus' aunt, so it is a power play. They say, Jesus, give us whatever we ask. He says, boys, you don't know what you're asking. Can you be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? In other words, can you be inundated with my suffering? Can you drink the cup, Old Testament metaphor for the wrath of God? And they go, oh yeah, we're ready to suffer. They have no clue. And Jesus called everybody together because the others are a bit peeved at James and John. Not because they were selfish and not because they were arrogant, but because they beat them to the punch. They all wanted to sit at Jesus' right hand and left hand. So Jesus says, huddle up, guys, something to say. Verse 42. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. The phrase, they are considered rulers, in the English is passive. They are considered rulers. In the Greek, it's active. The implication is not that others saw the rulers and said, wow, they're a ruler. No, it's that the rulers presented themselves. They gave the impression they were rulers. How? Well, by the way they dressed, by their entourage, by the military accoutrements around them. They had titles, they had position, they had power, and they flaunted it. They presented themselves as rulers. And then the people go, oh, okay, you're the ruler. What is interesting, though, is Mark says the rulers of the Gentiles. In his literary world of the book of Mark, there were only two of those, Pilate and Herod. And I want you to look closely at both of them and how they ruled. Pilate, for example, is about to give Jesus over to the Jews to capitulate to their request to crucify him, even though he did not want to. Why would you give in to the demands of people you don't respect for a request that you know is evil? Because they threatened him. They said, if you don't give us what we want, you're no friend of Caesar. And because his political career was more important than his integrity, Pilate caved in to their request. You see, Pilate was a ruler of the Gentiles. But like all rulers of Gentiles, he was ruled by his desire to be seen as a ruler. The second character in Mark is Herod. You probably know a bit of his story. On his birthday, they throw a big party, and everybody's celebrating. And Herod's wife, his illegal wife that he stole from his half-brother Philip, that wife sent her daughter to her stepfather to dance. And it was a little more risque than the lambada. This is PG-17 stuff. And Herod, of course, hook, line, and sinker says, "Oh, my dear, ask whatever you want, up to half my kingdom, and I'll give it to you." She goes and consults with her mother, and her mother says, "Ask for the head of John the Baptist on a platter." She hated John. Herod sobered up quick. He gave in to the request of his pubescent stepdaughter. Why? Because he was ruled by his desire to be seen as a ruler. And so it is with rulers today. When you present yourself as a ruler and you use your power for self-promotion and self-protection, you will always be ruled by your desire to be seen as a ruler. And Jesus said, it's not going to be so among you. And he gives this statement in verse 43 that is the genesis of what we call servant leadership. He says, "But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." There's a couple of really important lessons here. It starts with Jesus. The way he served was to use his power for the powerless. Not self-protection, not self-promotion. He truly became a servant to those he desired to lead. And if you're not a servant of those you desire to lead, not only are you not like Jesus, but you will always be a slave to your desire to be seen as a leader. But the second thing that's really important in this is the lesson for James and John. Yes, Jesus is going to die for the sins of the world, and that's the way ultimately he will serve as a servant those he wants to lead. But he calls us to the same. Notice that James and John were not rebuked for their request. They were told how to be significant leaders by becoming a servant to all. And here's something we all need to take away from this lesson. Jesus' cross saved the world from her sins. But the cross of the Christian saves society from hers. And as we lead and love by suffering and serving, it's then that we'll make an impact for Jesus, like Jesus.